tried to rearrange the tables and chairs all week because we don't have it quite figured out. Thank you all for being here. And help yourself. We've got cheese and crackers and some sparkling water to let you enjoy while we talk about flower power. So, are we good? All right. So welcome to the first art discovery for 2025. Today's panel is Flower Power, and I've got these dynamic and powerful women up here. Not that men don't do flowers, but this is an all-girl panel, so we're excited about that. Today we have, from your left, Heidi Brosner, right here from Arizona, with some of her entourage here. Elizabeth Butler, beautiful Elizabeth, a brand new mom, well, 9-month-old mom. And right next to me is Abigail Henry Crow from Utah. And I'm Susan Morrow Poget, and along with my husband and a great team of people, we're the ones that bring you the celebration of fine art each year. And welcome to our brand new location. Anybody have trouble finding it? It's just across the street. So we're excited to be here. We love, I don't know, it feels cozier or something. I don't know. We're very happy and I'm glad to be open and up and running and sharing the beautiful art with our community and all of you. So welcome, welcome. So today, actually my sister, I was visiting my sister back in November and I said, Anne, I've got to get to work on these art discovery topics. And she said, well, I'll help you come up with some ideas. So Flower Power was my sister Anne. So hopefully she's watching. But I thought, yeah, that's a great topic because, you know, we're all inspired by nature, and these women are going to share with us about why they've been drawn to flowers. And but I do like to start by having each of you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been painting, and maybe how long you've been in the celebration. I'm going to start with Heidi. You've been here the longest. Don't remind me.
I'm Heidi Rosner. I have been 25 seasons. This is my 25th season at Celebration of Fine Art. I only participated 24 years. I took 1 year off in the middle. But it's my 25th season of being a part of the community. What else did you ask? I paint in watercolor. I do these. And I live here in Scottsdale, and my inspiration is everywhere I look. Everywhere I look. Is that enough? I could go into more, but...
And when did you begin painting?
Oh, I started painting in 1994 when I moved to Arizona from Southern California after the Northridge earthquake, because the earth moved, and I decided I didn't want to live anywhere where the earth moved anymore, so the next closest warm climate was Scottsdale. And I moved here and took a watercolor class at the Scottsdale Art School to meet people, because I didn't know anybody here. And that launched me into this illustrious career.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, Elizabeth, let's hear a little bit about you.
I'm Elizabeth Butler. This is my 7th season at the Celebration of Fine Art. Very exciting. This show really was the beginning of my full-time career as an artist. So in some ways it really marks 7 years of doing this full-time, which was decidedly different from making art and teaching and making art and doing a lot of other things. So I've been painting for a long time, and I painted as a child too, and I studied it in college. But as a kind of in the focused way, it's been the past 7 years, and then previously before that, I'd say kind of starting with college, so a good 18 years doing it. And when I came to this show, flowers really became my focus, actually. Florals were kind of the body of work that I presented to be here. I studied portraiture and figure painting, so it was kind of a switch from what my degree was in college and from what I taught when I was teaching high school and grade school. But it was like a very easy yes in many ways. I had a garden, and I still have a garden, so that's part of it for me.
Excellent. All right, Abigail.
Hello, thanks for having me. This is my first time doing this, and this is my second year here at Celebration. And I actually I've been attending this for the last 10 years because I grew up coming to this show. So my dad's an artist here, Carrie Henry. So I actually grew up looking at your work, at Elizabeth and Heidi's work, and it's kind of been this tapestry of what's inspired me, and I just, I love your stuff. So I come here and I'd see these massive, beautiful paintings that were just awe-inspiring. My eyes were this big every time I came. But yeah, so I've always had art in my life, but the last couple of years I've really focused on my craft, and so I got a degree in illustration, and then I thought, I love painting on canvas. Let's see what happens when I paint on acrylic glass. So my work here, it has kind of this glossy effect, and that comes from the substrate I work on. And I think flowers in particular are really inspiring because they're both simple and complex, and they are lessons on natural beauty, and it is really just a pleasure to kind of discover what they mean in a painting. And I can't grow anything to save my life, so I don't have to water these, so I'm pretty happy about that. So I have great respect to those who can garden.
Perfect. That's a great, thank you very much. And that's a great segue into, there's so many diverse subjects that you can choose from, and all of you also paint things besides flowers, obviously, but when we think about the inspiration of flowers, and as we described in the description, there's so many things about flowers that can inspire you, the color, the shape, the shadows. So I'm going to start again with you, Heidi. You are well known for some signature flowers, but just talk about why you're drawn to captivating the feeling of a flower.
Good question. I was a gardener as well. I grew up gardening, and flowers were always in my life. My mom loved flowers. Her favorite flower was the Oriental poppy, and it's one of the flowers that I paint probably the most. We grew up in Michigan, and every winter the snow would come and she would be devastated because certainly the poppies would not survive a Michigan winter, and every spring they came back up and she was grateful, and it taught me hope. So gardening, the beginning of my gardening love was that there's always hope, that something can come out of this disastrous winter. Something beautiful blooms in the spring. I love the architecture of flowers. The way that petals are luminous and yet, they're transparent and luminous, and yet they create these cast shadows on the petals. And so the intricacies of the shadows and the way that they hit the petals and curve around is fascinating to me. So when I decide that there's a flower that I want to paint, the first thing that captures me about it is the shadows. It's not necessarily the subject of the flower, it's the way the darks and the lights interplay and create that luminous effect. And they're organic, so even if you paint something a little wrong, it's not wrong because it's organic. I mean, come on, who's going to know that a petal's in the wrong place, right? So they're very forgiving as subjects. It's the opposite of a portrait, if you will, where if you don't nail it, like Judith Dickinson over there, oh my God, she nails it with these portraits. If you don't nail it with a flower, who's going to know? Nature created it. It's not like someone's face. So it's a very forgiving subject in addition to being a very interesting and complex subject.
It's perfectly imperfect, right? Yeah.
Perfectly imperfect.
I think what I love about flowers is putting them together and seeing how they are in relationship to each other. Both how they grew in nature, but then also the hand that I put into it to decide what goes next to what. So I make arrangements first, and then I photograph them and actually work from the photograph. And recently I've been thinking a lot about nature. It's always been an inspiration for all of my work. And the more I've reflected on my relationship and love, like I have never tired of painting them. It has to do, I think, with this desire to recognize our connection and our interconnectedness with nature, that we're not separate from it. And I think that's why I never put vases in my work. It's never an arrangement of flowers in a vase, which in some ways really creates a sense of, I'm the viewer and here are your flowers. And that's a beautiful thing. but I'm really interested in feeling like I am a part of those flowers. And so when I put them together, you know, my energy is put into that, and these particular relationships between white flowers next to green flowers and the different leaves, I think that's where my sort of attraction to the subject matter really comes in, is that I want you to feel like you're a part of it too, like you could actually enter into this arrangement. I think that's also a part of the scale. I like working large because you kind of do have to enter into it and participate in it as opposed to just being an observer.
Beautiful, yeah.
For me, I feel like kind of similar to Heidi here, that I love portraiture. That's definitely one of my first things that I learned how to paint. But flowers have this effortless joy that you can experiment with textures and color and motion and all these wonderful things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do with a face. I mean, you can have a lot more imagination with it, which is really, really fun. In my work, I love being able to focus on a few flowers and then let everything just kind of fall apart. It's like that feeling of, it's that flow state of being so engrossed in a subject that everything else kind of fades away. And so in my work, I have a lot of these kind of soft backgrounds, these really soft gradients, and it's almost like you're like looking at a flower and everything else is blurry behind you. But I'm really inspired by biology and the science behind nature, but also poetry. I love how poets such as Mary Oliver have been able to use flowers as a symbol for, you know, life and death and love and loss, particularly impermanence, as I mentioned before. But they're such lovely, beautiful constructs, but they're so delicate and they're so easily disposed of, I guess, in a way. And so my job as an artist is to create permanence and eternity in something that's impermanent, which I think is one of the most special things that a person can do, is to create in that sense.
I love that. And I love your comment that you don't have to water these, so permanent flowers, I love it. That's great. I love how we can really connect with the beauty and the inspiration of the flowers. And each of you work in a unique technique. So Heidi's a watercolor artist, which traditional watercolor was always on paper. And you have a little bit of a story about how you created your own substrate. You might notice that even though it's watercolors, the colors are very vibrant and they pop. A lot of people would say, oh, I thought watercolors were always really soft and translucent. But I'd love for you to talk about that. And then Elizabeth, you use mixed media, you use a lot of gold or silver leaf in your pieces. And I would love to hear a little bit about the inspiration of how that plays with the florals and the landscapes. And then Abigail, you paint on a very interesting acrylic glass, front and back a little bit. So I think it would be kind of interesting to hear from each of you about how you created the substrates or chose them and why you think they interplay well with the floral.
Well, we'll just keep going in order.
I suddenly felt like I was introducing the dating game earlier. Like, and here we have Elizabeth. It's the flower dating game, art game.
Okay, so traditional watercolor is always on paper. Well, not always, but usually on paper. And I painted on paper for years and years and years. And I would get some pushback from my collectors. They didn't want to have to necessarily frame the pieces. They didn't want the pieces, as they would say, to hide behind glass. And so I struggled with that because I shifted to acrylic and then I worked in oil for a little bit, and I never liked the mediums as much as I love watercolor. I love what watercolor does. It moves on its own. It's the only place in my life where I don't feel like I need to control it. Like, people that know me know that's true. And so I decided I'm an engineer by background, and so I decided to experiment with different materials for substrates. And there's some off-the-shelf materials that you can use, some grounds that you can use to create an absorptive surface. And I played around with them, and then I decided to try and improve upon them a little bit and add some of my own secret sauce to it. And so my substrate consists of 5 different layers for each painting. So the preparation of my canvases and panels is not trivial. I sand between each layer, put another layer down, sand between it, and then the top layer has all the texture that you can see. If you get up close to my pieces, you can see there's a lot of nubby texture that I do with various household items. And it's absorptive, so it takes the watercolor. And because of the absorption, I put lots and lots of layers down, and that's what creates the vibrancy. I use all transparent watercolors, so you can actually see the different layers through the top layer. The colors show through, they shimmer a little bit. Some of them are sedimentary, so they settle into those little nooks and crannies that I create on my surface. I finish the piece by spraying fixative, and then I do a brush-on varnish. So it eliminates the need for glass, it eliminates the need for matting, it eliminates the need for framing, although I do frame many of my pieces. It's an optional thing. Some people would prefer a framed piece, some people don't want them framed. So I have a lot more flexibility and accessibility to clients that didn't necessarily want to collect watercolor even though they loved my work. So it's opened up a new collector base. I've been doing it this way for about 15 years maybe, and I've improved upon my original substrate greatly. But the same basic principles, layer upon layer of absorptive stuff, and then painting on top of it.
It's a beautiful combination of the engineer meets artist and solves a problem and creates something of beauty. So there's lots of people here that have backgrounds that are very diverse, that it's exciting to see how that impacts the career of the artist as well. So very good. And Elizabeth, gold leaf and silver leaf really are I would say one of your signatures.
Yeah.
And why do you like to play with them?
I love this question because, you know, I think so many decisions we make are really intuitive, and it's just like, well, I like it. Ooh, I like this, you know? And then you think about it, and there really is something behind it. You know, you kind of pull the thread, and you begin to see in your own work where it's all coming from. And I think it's really interesting that we each work on different surfaces, because your surface really informs the work that you make. There are marks that I can only make on this kind of surface. And so I work on a wood panel, partially because the leaf will take any texture underneath it, and so I want a smooth surface. And it's also not very, it doesn't absorb. So the paint kind of sits on top. It adheres, but it doesn't sink into the way it will for linen canvas or cotton canvas. So the brushes I use are going to be really soft. I use a lot of soft brushes, and then I have a big brush that I use that softens marks out even more. But the leaf, yes.
Closer. Closer.
Oh, closer. Ice cream. I get so excited. The leaf itself, it's not just a background. I think when I started, it really was a background. And as I kept working with it, I began to learn how to allow that gold or silver to shine through, and then begin to play with the properties of the paint that you're using. So if you have a transparent color, there's a gold shining through this green, and that's just really beautiful. And then as I would experiment with copper, all of a sudden you realize that green looks really different on copper if you're allowing that copper to show through. Same thing with silver. And so the color of the leaf began to also direct a little bit the floral compositions. I really love working in whites and greens and cooler colors on a silver leaf. And it just kind of goes together. So there's a beautiful harmony between choosing your material and then allowing that material to direct you a little bit as you continue to make choices. And it's the same with the texture, because it's so slick. The tools that I'll use to paint with extend beyond a brush. I might use a squeegee. I might be pulling the paint differently because this surface is asking for that. You can't paint on it like you would in a more traditional way because it's so shiny and smooth. And then recently I've been working kind of more in a collage and mixed media way, where I'm incorporating aspects of the leaf into the flowers themselves, as opposed to just allowing a gold to show through. Like this piece, there's dyed silver, which is kind of this green color, and you have white gold here, and it plays with you a little bit. You're not sure if you're looking at paint or if you're looking at leaf. Depending on where you are in the room, it's going to pick up the light differently. So in some ways it becomes interactive, which is part of what I love. I want you to feel like this piece is also living and changing with you as the light changes throughout the day. And I just kind of fell in love. It's really fun. That's also part of it. It kind of sparks my brain in a different way. And so a lot of the bright colors are actually from different kinds of leaf. So I've had to learn a lot about the material and how to use it. And it just makes me really happy also. And it's shiny and beautiful. And I've had to learn a lot too, how to work with value. Value is totally different on a reflective surface because the value of this silver, depends on what's being reflected in it. So it's been also very challenging, which I enjoy also. And I think too, there's an aspect of it being, there's a natural element to it. You know, it's metal. And I think that somewhere does something for me also. It also really helps with the experience of the flowers being suspended in space. And so it kind of just pulled it all together for me. I think when I reflected back on it, I realized like this was a great solution to not having a vase and to wondering how the background was going to work. And I knew my focal point was the flowers. I knew that was the story. And I think that element of nature continues to weave through the story as I work more and more into leaf, which has also started to spill over into my different landscape paintings. And it's really served as an inspiration for how I wanted to capture the desert. Different subject, but this has been so impactful in my work and I've loved it so much with the florals. I've just wanted to continue to explore that translation.
Thank you. And it's a beautiful, like abstract, but we know exactly what we're looking at. And your landscapes have even a little bit more of an abstract in the mosaic feel. So you'll have to check those out at her space. But how hard is it to work with the leaf? Because I've seen, like, it's very fly away.
Yeah.
And do you have to lock it up to keep Zach out of it?
Yes.
Zach's her baby.
Yes, it's very messy. And I am not precise. In some ways, I can be very precise, you know, especially when I'm painting if I want. But the leaf doesn't, the way I use it, it doesn't allow for that, which is part of what I enjoy. It's going to break as it breaks. You don't have that much control when you're using it in this more collage fashion for kind of some of these areas. Underneath is all these large pieces of silver leaf, and I also apply that in a way that it can be seen. So I'm not a gilder in the way that traditional gilders would, you know, gild surfaces in a very precise manner. I allow and in fact want a lot more of an organic feel. But it flies away. If you see little pieces of leaf on that side of the tent, guilty. I do try to sweep it up, but it just, you know, kind of gets everywhere. And that's part of it too. It will fall. When I'm working, the whole surface is sticky, and if a piece falls, it's there. It's kind of done. Yeah, it just, which I have really learned to love that surprise and working with that, and again, allowing that to direct the piece a little bit more instead of getting caught up with that sort of long-term vision, being really present in the moment of what now has to shift, because that gold stuck in a place I really didn't intend for it to be.
Being very fluid is very important. That's great. Thank you. So let's hear about your amazing palette.
Okay, so yeah, the material I work on is acrylic glass. Some people would say it's a plexiglass, but it's very archival. It's very long-lasting material, and I think as many artists can attest that one part of the problem is figuring out what you're going to do, what kind of material or what kind of thing you're going to do, and you know, flowers are our thing. And the other part of the problem is what are you going to say with that? Like, how are you going to make those shapes work together in an interesting way? And so with my material, the acrylic glass I work on is very slick. It doesn't absorb anything. It absorbs enough for it to stay on there and comfortably stay on the substrate without it flaking off or peeling off or anything. It's on there, but it is very slippery. So with that in mind, I had to figure out, how do I create these layers and how do I make this painting work when every stroke is just slipping? So I learned how to be really precise in my mark making. So not only do I work with brushes, but I work with a brayer. So in printmaking, it's this little like paint roller kind of thing. It's just this little cylinder that I use to make my mark. So if you see me in my studio, you'll see me with a couple of brushes in one hand and then a brayer in the other, because I use that to spread my colors in ways that I think are really interesting. So the acrylic glass allows me to experiment with shapes that I never would get on canvas. And not only do I get interesting shapes, but I also get a really wonderful sense of luminosity and depth with it. And you see kind of like a shadow being cast almost from the front layer being cast onto the back layer. So I work with just a single layer, single pane of acrylic glass. And a lot of people think I have multiple layers of glass on it, but it's just one 1/4 inch thick acrylic piece. And so I'll paint a little bit on the front. So the flowers are painted on one side, and then on the other side is actually, you're seeing to the back. So if we were to take an X-ray and look at these paintings, you'd see wood or gesso, and with mine, you don't need an X-ray because it's just clear all the way through. You just see straight to the back, which is the part of the oil painting. And what I love about this material is that there's a lot of spontaneity to it. I never quite know how painting's going to turn out because of how the paint sits on it, and so I'm always experimenting. I'm always learning as I'm going. But yeah, it's challenging to work on, and I think I appreciate how challenging it is because I never get bored. I'm always rediscovering how to make this painting work. So.
And you definitely you do not want to overwork your painting, because every time you move it, it's just making it more, as you said, slippery, and you're losing the definition. Although the back with the roller part, that's a lot looser.
Yeah. So the back is actually more difficult than the front, I think, because once the back is done, I can't sand it down because that would eliminate the translucent aspect of it. So the background is I have to be really methodical and what would be the word? Deliberate. So and I actually work in reverse part of the time. So in the Gerber Daisy piece, I have a couple of layers here. So that blue that you're seeing on the bottom, I had to put that down first, let that dry, and then I applied my greens and my oranges. And so it creates this layered effect that's actually quite difficult to achieve, because if I want to get a certain texture, I have to let that sit, and then I'll go back over it. So half of it's done in reverse, and the other half is done like a normal painting, I guess.
Does the acrylic glass impact the time that it takes the acrylic paint to dry, or is it about the same as if it was on canvas?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And it does really well. I use a speed dryer. I use liquid, and liquid is kind of this clear gel-like substance, and it helps the paint to adhere to the acrylic glass, but also helps it to dry quickly. And so when I work in layers, I let it set for a day or less, and then come back to it. But I usually can get my paintings done pretty quickly because of the material that I use. But the liquid also, it helps with the transparency of my paint. So some parts are really opaque and some parts are more transparent, and that I think adds to the whole nature of the glass-like effect.
Yeah, very luminous, right? So fascinating. I know Stuart Yankel also paints on front and back but it's something that you really don't see many artists doing. So it's definitely honed in art skills. So there's so much to learn from these artists here, and we kind of like to think that we have the most incredible collection of artists that you could go anywhere in the world and not find such a strong caliber collection of people in one place that are excellent at what they do. So happy to have you guys here to talk about it. Heidi, so you've been here 25, that's hard to believe, since we're only 30. But the life of an artist, I mean, you came from the super tight engineering background. She was at like aeronautical engineering stuff to expressing joy and beauty through art. And that had to be a great release to walk away from the very intricately detailed stuff that was life or death to creating joy and beauty.
Well, it wasn't really life or death.
Well, if you're dealing with something that flies and people might be in it, or, you know.
I was a mechanical engineer and I worked in the aerospace industry.
I'm going to say life or death.
And I did that for a while, and then I moved into management and just led teams of researchers to do fabulous things. And when I moved to Arizona, I started a consulting business. So I left the engineering management behind and I went into organizational management and strategic planning and all that. So that was the leap from that work to this work. But it was a very gradual burn. I was a weekend warrior painter after that one workshop that I took at the Scottsdale Art School, and I would paint and tuck my paintings under the bed and never show them to anybody because what's the point? And so I kept doing that for a number of years, and then at one point I had a dinner party with a bunch of girlfriends, and they convinced me to pull the paintings out from under the bed. So I did, and their response was pretty overwhelming. And they wanted to purchase them and whatever, and I'm like, no, just take them, really. It's just doodles. It doesn't matter, you know, they're not important. And one of the friends of mine was a graphic artist, and she did a line of note cards, and so she asked me if I wanted to print some note cards, and I said, well, what would I do with that? She goes, well, you could sell them or give them away or do whatever you want. And so she was doing a print run. This was back in the day where you actually printed sheets of cards instead of digital imaging. And so we shared a press run, and for Christmas that year, I sent a little packet of 4 note cards in envelopes with a little raffia ribbon tied around it to everybody on my Christmas list instead of my annual Christmas letter. And I put a little note in there saying, this is what I've been up to, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. And I sent out 100 of those packets, and I got probably 90 responses saying, oh my God, you paint? Where are the rest of your paintings? Can I buy these? What can I do? Can you send me images? I was literally blown away. And so this same friend invited me to participate in a National Stationery Show in New York City. So we printed a bunch of cards and went to the National Stationery Show in New York. And I sold cards to retailers all over the country and started thinking about, well, maybe these paintings aren't so bad. Maybe there's a future here. So I started with the festival circuit. My first festival was the Fountain Hills Festival in 1997. God bless them for letting me in. And somewhere in my studio, I have a photo of me in my first booth at Fountain Hills, and I used picket fence pieces from Home Depot to hang my artwork on. I didn't know anything about anything.
The crisscross?
No, the kind of like these white fences out here, just like literally pieces of white fence that they sold at Home Depot, and I zip tied them together, and that created my booth. And I had, I don't know, 16 or 17 paintings hanging on these picket fences. And the show opened, and I sold everyone but one painting. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I've created a monster. And so I started applying to festivals and getting in and doing fairly well at them. And so in 2001, I started here, and it really was the one thing that catapulted my professional art career. I cannot emphasize that enough. I showed up as a festival artist. I eventually bought pro panels and did the professional rig, so I didn't continue on with that. But I started over on that side in a little end cap studio.
They're all good.
They're all good.
They're all good.
But it was little, and I had like a lot of stuff at that point, and so there's not enough space. But you know, it's never enough space when you're an artist. I want more. So I started doing the show, and I was still doing my consulting business and doing Celebration, and then I was doing more festivals, and I was a little overwhelmed with everything. And in 2003, I shut down the consulting business and started to do my art full time. And I still did some festivals, but as of about, 12 years ago, something like that, I no longer did festivals except for one. And I gave that one up about 7 or 8, Glenn and I were talking about this, I gave that up about 7 or 8 years ago, and now I only do Celebration. It's my one show of the year. But being in this community, exposed to this incredible talent base and knowledge base of not just the art world, but the art marketplace, and how to run a business as an artist, which is something that's elusive to many artists. It's hard to do both, but since I have a business background, I'm probably better at that than I am at painting. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
But I have a good balance of that, and so I've learned even more about the business of art, and I've learned so much about the art side of art. And I attribute, I would say, 75% of my success to being a part of this show.
Yay. I like that.
Wonderful. And you are very organized. If you ever need somebody to tell you how to get organized, go see Heidi. And one of the things I love that you do, because I don't know why I think it's so cool, like the little color studies that you create to go you do a lot of commissions, and lots of collectors here, but the way that you organize your commissions and your color palettes, and you hi Zach, it's fun. To me, it's fun. I think she should do a book of like her color palette studies and such.
One of the reasons I do that, if any of you are watercolorists, you know it's not very forgiving. You get kind of one shot. So if I'm doing a big commission for someone, even a small commission, I'll do a little color study, and I'll do the palette colors and a little sketch in color of form, fit, function of what the piece is going to be, because they need to approve that before I'm going to go a larger scale. Because if I do something very specific on a larger scale and they don't like it, I can't go in and add more white, or, oh, can you make this a yellow poppy instead of an orange one? Or, I'd like another bud on that cactus over there. I can't do that. Oil painters can do that, but watercolorists, you got to plan the whole thing out right from the gate, and that's why I like it so much, because it lets me be organized geek.
Planner. And do you pencil sketch in your outlines?
Yes, but I use watercolor pencils because they dissolve, they disappear. So I used to use graphite pencils, and people would have a lot of issues with, oh, there's pencil lines on this. Well, I mean, John Singer Sargent has pencil lines on his paintings, but we'll not get into those details. So I started using watercolor pencils because they disappear. Sometimes it's troublesome because I have it all sketched in, and then I put a wash over it, and it's like, oh, nuts. Where did my drawing go? So I'll have to recreate the drawing over the wash, but for the most part, it's better to do that, because then I know where my lights and darks are, and I can save the light space and save the whites.
Save the white space, that's important, because you can't paint white watercolor.
Not unless I use acrylic over it, and I only use transparent watercolors, so I don't use any opaque.
And I know, in addition to having your garden, you are inspired by our desert, and actually there's a great video story on Heidi's work, but during the springtime in Arizona, it's like, how many of you ever moved here thinking everything's going to be brown? And then we discover the color of the desert. And you'll go out, she hikes a lot, you'll go out and take photographs. Talk a little bit about that. And you also capture things like, you know, the little owls and the cactus. And
Yeah, I love hiking. I love being out in the desert. And if there's anything pretty to look at, I'm taking pictures of it for reference photos. I've got 15,000 reference photos on my iPad, which is troublesome because I'm not great at keeping track of them. But I hike usually early mornings where the shadows are really long and it creates really wonderful effects on a painting. In my studio, you'll see I have a bunch of pieces that I call the Serenity Collection, which are white backgrounds, and they feature the long shadows of morning or evening light, and it's just such a beautiful contrast. And the shapes of shadows, I think, are really intriguing to me. So when I'm out in nature, you know, as opposed to going on the internet and looking for pictures of cactus to paint, they're never good. They never work. They're not photos of things that I want to paint because they're usually missing the light. So when I'm out and about, I love to capture that on my own. And I live in a community where there's lots of natural desert all around. I also have garden front and back and everything. I grow a lot of things. And so I have my own reference material right in my own neighborhood. And it's lovely to capture where I live. I mean, I paint other things as well, but I love the desert. And it's always been kind of the thing that I want to express. The love of the desert is the thing I want to express in my pieces, as well as my love of flowers and all that stuff. So it's basically me on a canvas.
I love it. We have one of the night blooming cactus, and I get so excited the mornings that I go running out. It's like, oh my gosh, we have 18 blooms, and then they're gone by like 8:30. But
This Argentinian giant on the end, I bought at the Desert Botanical Garden plant sale like 2 years ago, and this was the first time it bloomed. I nearly did handsprings in my front yard. I was like, oh my God, she's blooming! So I went out and captured that real quick, and I've done a bunch of paintings from that specimen. Yeah. So that was really fun. It's not fun to grow it and then paint it. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah, and we all love the Desert Botanical Garden for sure. Lots of inspiration. So Elizabeth, I know I love the way you arrange your flowers, and how many of you have lived here long enough to remember when Baseline Road had all the flower markets? Oh, do we miss those? So where do you like to find your reference material?
I find them everywhere. It's if I like it, you know, there are a number. I do work with some wholesale flower places here for a wider variety, but I've discovered it's really in the combination of the flowers, and so it could be, you know, a Trader Joe's run, and then Whole Foods is right next door, and sometimes they have fantastic flowers, and how you put them together is, for me, what really makes the piece. So as long as it's really more about color and shape. Sometimes people ask me if I have a favorite flower, and I don't, because it's the relationship between them that I find so inspiring. And so as long as it's kind of the right shapes and colors together, I can flowers from anywhere. And sometimes it's from flowers that I've grown, or neighbors' flowers, or kumquats when they're in season. You know, I try to grab what's around, and then whatever, I guess, grabs my attention in the moment. So, but wholesale flower shops are great. There are some Camelback Flower Shop sometimes gets in some really unique flowers that are just gorgeous. So I'll kind of, what I do is I have like a flower arranging week, and it's quite extensive because you're running around to get your flowers, and they only last for so long, and then I'll spend a day arranging, and usually, and then photographing, and then the next day I kind of know what I missed from the day before, and I might run out and get more flowers, and make new arrangements, and I'll do that a couple days in a row. And then as flowers die, I pull those flowers out and make new arrangements. And so it's very organic in its process too, and kind of pull, you know, some oranges in, or lemons, especially if they're in season. It's really responsive. You know, it's really what I walk in. I don't go in with a plan. I'll walk into a flower shop, and if I feel a response to a flower, I just grab it and figure it out later. And which means I have hundreds of references, which works really well for commissions. You know, if there's a piece that you love that you want a variation of, more than likely I have hundreds of references within that color scheme, or I'll build you a whole new bouquet. But it just keeps giving that way. And then I also do use Photoshop to arrange compositions also, so you don't get everything in the right spot. So I might pull from a different photo and put that flower into this picture, and then make a flower bigger. You know, there are some elements of composition that floral arrangement that's beautiful doesn't necessarily translate to a great painting. There's a lot of work that kind of goes in between those steps to arrange it on Photoshop to create exactly the focal point and kind of the feel that I want. So kind of arranges in a lot of different ways when it comes to it.
Well, you're a master of the color and the composition that just every time you look at one of your pieces, it just all comes together. So I love it. So Abigail, I like that you leave a lot of space around you, where Elizabeth's filling the whole canvas. Heidi generally is going to fill the whole. I like the negative space. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that's important in your composition?
Okay, so I kind of approach it in a couple of different ways. It's one of those things, like what Elizabeth said, where it's really intuitive for me. It makes sense to me in my mind. It's taken me a bit of time to kind of analyze and figure out exactly why do I do that. It's a lot of art is done like that, where it's not so much, okay, I'm going to do this because of this. It's more like it's instinctual almost, in a sense. I'm really inspired by Japanese art, especially during the Impressionist era. They were very inspired by, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Japanism? But there's that kind of formality to it, where it's suspended in place, and it's very structured. And I also really, I've always been really inspired by the pressed flower. It's almost like a pressed flower on glass. That's actually how I started with this, is that I would go to Savers, and I would find little glass frames, and I'd take everything out except for the glass, and I'd keep the frame, and I'd glue the glass in place, and then I'd paint a tiny little flower, and it'd look like a pressed flower, but it was a little more vibrant, had a little more motion to it than a pressed flower. And I'd sell that at a farmer's market. So that's kind of my background, was farmer's markets, and which was so much fun, because I would be there with the flower market people, and they'd be selling their flowers, and I'd be selling pressed flowers, but they were oil paintings. So that's kind of my background in that area. And so I think that's why my flowers are so kind of isolated and I don't want to say dignified, but what's the word? Solitary, I guess. A little more formal, because of that idea that it's almost like a pressed flower. And the backgrounds I have, they kind of flatten everything, and so I think that kind of it's like, yeah, pressed flowers.
I love that. Yeah, I have thought that a lot when I see your work. And I love the farmer's market. And Jake and I we took a trip, it was September, up from Salt Lake to Jackson and then on to Cody. And we had a detour to go to, what's the town north of Salt Lake that is like really known for their peaches and tomatoes? Anyway, we had to go, and then we got cherries and everything, and I called everybody in Cody, do you want some fresh fruit? Because we couldn't take it all home with us. So anyway, beautiful inspiration. But I know we probably have people with questions, and it's probably about time to think about questions. Anybody have questions for our beautiful panel? Or comments? Or you guys want to keep talking? Anybody online? Yeah? So, Wendy, you always have a question.
I'm overwhelmed.
I mean, it's a lot of information, and I think,
Well, I absolutely love flowers. And one of the things that always stuck with me from a long time ago, the thing that really stuck with me, I love it. I have gardens. I've got a horticultural degree. I went from being a physio to being a horticulturalist to really being absorbed in art. But anyways, I read an article that was written in a magazine, and the journalist was interviewing Princess Grace. This is how long ago it is. And she was really great at doing pressed flower work, framing it, and her garden was magnificent. And the one thing that stuck with me was that she turned to the journalist and said, "Have you ever looked into the heart of a flower?" It was the best thing, because when you think about it, somebody who enjoys plant life of any kind, hearing this about looking into the heart, and what you people are all expressing is, in and out and the whole deal. And it's just, that's why I'm a bit overwhelmed by it all and learning so much, for sure. And I'll come out. I mean, that's why I take notes, because I go home and I read them, and I've got 10 years of notes in little packets from every discovery that there's been over that period of time. So, and I learn all the time, and I love flowers, and I'm intrigued with Abigail's work. I really am intrigued, because I go into really looking at what people have got. Same with Elizabeth and Heidi, and I have sort of spent a lot of time together as well. Remind me, Abigail, what paint do you use with your flowers?
So I use oil paint, and I only use oil paint. Oh, no, it's okay. It can be confusing because I see like acrylic glass. So it's glass, but it's acrylic glass, but I use oil paint, so.
Yeah, don't ever say only for anything. That doesn't work for me. Because it's so more, life is much more expansive than just being only or using the word just. But no, I just wondered, because I was looking at it more closely today, and I advise anybody just to go and really look, not just straight on, but get to the side of the paintings. I love looking at art in every direction, and with these flower work, that's what you should do. Don't feel stupid standing and looking upside down or sideways or at any angle, because you get a depth to things that you don't see just looking straight on. But yeah, I'm sure I've got lots of questions when I go home, but I won't be there. Thanks, Susan.
I want a copy of all your notes.
Hi, I have a couple questions too. Heidi, I always stand there and I love cactus myself, but how many hours and hours do you tediously paint the beautiful cactus spines, but also the pollen? Do you have bees attract bees on your flowers? Because the wildflowers and the cactus, bees love it and make honey, so that's kind of fun.
Well, painting is never tedious for me. So they're never tedious hours. They're joyful hours. But there's a lot of hours.
That's my question.
I've never quantified it per se, because with my work, I have some drying time. And so I'll paint for a bit, and then I walk away and throw a load of laundry in, or go to the grocery store, and when I come back it's dry and I can paint some more. So I never just sit down. I mean, I do when I'm working on a series of things, but it's rare that I sit down and just paint for 8, 10, 12 hours straight.
Okay.
But it's not weird or unusual for me to paint for 8, 10, 12 hours in a day. They're just not straight through, usually. Because I work flat, and I only have so much table space available, so I can't have too many things going on at the same time.
I know.
Which is a little frustrating. And I've never painted a bee on one of my flowers, but I'll take it under advisement.
I have lots of photos of the pollinators on it.
And then I know Abigail, the first time I ever stood behind and watched you, I thought, oh, unusual. She has orange outline on certain things. So explain that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of my work will feature a bit of an outline, and it's a graphic tool. It helps create more of an illustration rather than a window per se into a world. It's more of like an illustrative experiment. I like to use linear elements like that line sometimes to create more of an emphasis. But also, I just think it's fun, and it's kind of different, and I think the shapes that it creates that you wouldn't normally notice in nature or in photos. But I mean, flowers have such a wonderful complexity, and to be able to simplify that is really interesting. So,
Yeah, very fun. It's funny, this morning we were talking about art and how it brings joy, and to walk around and look at your art. We talk about that a lot in these sessions, and I know a lot of us do that. And just this morning as I was leaving my house, the table right by our front door, I like to kind of layer things. So I have a Kim Ballard woman in a field, and my Abigail little hummingbird in front of it, and then this beautiful hand-carved ceramic piece that Jake and I bought somewhere with all animals, and then right over here is my Heidi Rosner yellow flower field. So, it makes me smile. And I have an Elizabeth Butler that's on a wall because it's larger than these pieces that are on my table. But it's fun to, layer the art and play with it and look at it every day and let it bring you joy. And what you ladies do certainly brings joy and beauty to the world, and you captivate the energy and dynamics of not just flowers, but everything that you do. And we're grateful that you can share that with all of us, and we would love for you to take the opportunity, if you haven't already, to find their studios and check them out. And we're so grateful to have these amazing artists with us, and thankful for all of you for participating and being here. And any last minute questions, or shall we wrap up and let people come enjoy? Anything? No. All right, well, next Friday is Faces and Figures, so another form of beauty that the artist will convey. So thank you all so very much. Look forward to seeing you again.